Let me tell you something strange about the child who was never loud enough to be noticed. We live in a world where children are shaped by what is corrected, praised, and responded to, yet some children grow up in rooms where nothing was said, no punishment, no praise, just absence. And here's the question that always lingers beneath the surface. What happens to a child who learns they don't matter enough to interrupt? At first glance, it's easy to misunderstand them. You might assume they were independent, low maintenance, mature for their age, the kind of child who didn't ask for much. But that's not the full picture. Beneath the surface, there's an entire psychology unfolding, one that has less to do with resilience and more to do with adaptation. See, for some people, being ignored wasn't neglect in the obvious sense. There was food, shelter, rules, but there wasn't attunement. No one noticed when they withdrew. No one mirrored their feelings back to them. No one asked what they needed when they stopped asking altogether. This isn't about blame. It's about understanding what happens when a nervous system learns early that visibility is optional. You can often recognize the ignored child long after childhood ends. They're the ones who hesitate before speaking, who wait for permission that never comes, who scan rooms before expressing opinions. They rarely demand attention, not because they don't want it, but because wanting it once felt unsafe. From the outside, they can seem calm, self-sufficient, emotionally contained, the easy person, the one who doesn't cause problems. But inside, something quieter is happening. A constant calculation. Is this worth taking up space? Is this worth the risk of being unseen again? Psychologists have noticed this pattern. When emotional needs are consistently unmet, children don't stop having needs, they stop signaling them. The ignored child doesn't protest, they adapt. And adaptation, when it lasts long enough, begins to feel like personality. So they become observant, hyper-aware, skilled at reading moods, shifts in tone, emotional, whether not because they're intuitive by nature, but because noticing became survival. And here's a reframe. It's not about being quiet. It's about learning early that silence was safer than expression. They don't lack depth. They learn to hide it. For many, this pattern didn't begin with cruelty. It began with preoccupation, parents who were overwhelmed, distracted, emotionally unavailable in ways that were never named. So the child learned something subtle, that their inner world didn't create response. At first, they tried harder. They became agreeable, helpful, achieving. But over time, something shifted. They stopped reaching outward and started folding inward. Here's what's often misunderstood. People assume the ignored child didn't care, but often they cared deeply once. What disappeared wasn't desire, it was hope. The psychological concept beneath this is emotional neglect, not abuse. Not harm by action, but harm by omission. When feelings aren't mirrored, the child doesn't learn what they feel. They learn what doesn't get answered, so the nervous system adapts. It becomes self-contained, self-soothing, hyper-independent, and in a culture that rewards independence, this often looks like strength. But here's the quiet cost. They grow up feeling invisible even when seen, unheard even when listened to, because attention without attunement still feels empty. And let's be honest, most of what we call maturity in children is really compliance. Stillness mistaken for stability, silence mistaken for peace. But silence learned for survival carries memory. Think about it. When was the first time you realized it was easier not to ask, not to explain, not to hope someone would notice how you felt without you spelling it out? And what part of you learned that lesson quietly and never forgot it? Not everyone who carries this pattern does so from peace. Some learned to disappear because visibility hurt, because being seen meant being misunderstood, dismissed, or overlooked again. So neutrality became protection. This is the paradox. The same behavior that looks like calm can be carrying unprocessed grief. There's a philosophical layer here, because being ignored doesn't just shape behavior, it shapes existence. In a world that says, be expressive, be confident, be loud, the ignored child learns a different philosophy, that presence is conditional, that attention must be earned, that being low maintenance keeps relationships intact. And yet, the more they shrink, the less they feel real. This is where transformation begins, not loudly, but subtly. The longer someone lives this way, the more they begin to feel detached from themselves, like they're watching life instead of inhabiting it. They feel deeply but hesitate to be felt. and that tension becomes exhausting. Research on emotional neglect shows that children raised without consistent emotional attunement often develop heightened self-regulation but diminished self-expression. Their nervous systems become efficient but guarded. When emotions are managed internally without relational repair, the body stays vigilant on the outside, alert on the inside. This isn't weakness, it's adaptation. And yet, people shaped by being ignored are often deeply perceptive, thoughtful, introspective. Their quiet isn't emptiness, it's containment. Maybe that's what real depth looks like, not constant expression, but measured presence, not performing emotion, but protecting it. Perhaps some people don't speak much because they know how much it costs to be unheard. Maybe their restraint isn't fear. Maybe it's discernment. Maybe they're not invisible. Maybe they're careful with visibility. So if this felt familiar, you don't need to explain why. You don't need to comment, you don't need to name yourself, but if it resonates, you're welcome to leave a quiet word below or not. Your silence is valid too. So the next time you notice someone who rarely speaks about themselves, who doesn't ask for much, who seems comfortable in the background, don't assume they lack depth. Maybe they learned early how to disappear without leaving. And maybe healing doesn't mean becoming louder. Maybe it means allowing yourself to exist without needing permission. Because being ignored doesn't mean you were unimportant. It means no one was listening yet. And perhaps the most profound act of growth is learning to hear yourself after years of silence.